Making it easier for sex offenders to get out of prison is exactly as controversial as you would expect. Companies that won't hire Coloradans for remote work because of a new law here, they're getting more attention. Healing the mental damage done by Colorado's natural disasters. Whether the recent rain will impact our coming fire season. Nebraska troopers pull over a Coloradan and were more interested in his 181-pound passenger, Mary Jane. And before we say goodbye to Next Home Studio and its strangely famous woodpile, I have a confession to make. Next. Some of Colorado's sex offenders are required to get treatment before they're released into the community. It is required for good reason, public safety. But that step can be outside of the offender's control. A suddenly controversial bill at the state capitol could free some of those inmates before they get their required sex offender treatment. Politics guy Marshall Zellinger is along now after sifting through what is a pretty confusing bill. Marshall?
One of the most confusing I've seen in a long time. You've got certain sex offenders that are in prison for a specific amount of time, and they get released whether or not they get the treatment when that end date comes. Then you've got other sex offenders in prison for an indeterminate amount of time. So think 2 years to life. And whether or not they get that treatment sometimes keeps them in prison. So let's say that right now there's a backlog of prisoners who could be released if only they got that treatment. There's a bill right now at the Capitol that could change some of that, and that would change a person may not receive that treatment while in prison and then could get released, and then we expect that treatment to happen after the fact.
We are requiring people to get treatment, but we're not giving it to them. So what we have is a group of people that are sitting in prison that can't get access to the treatment they are required to have. And we have a court that says there's a constitutional right that they have to get that treatment.
Under our current scheme, you're going to prison until, and are not eligible for release until the experts of the Sex Offender Management Board have said that you have successfully progressed in treatment and that you no longer pose an undue threat to the community. This removes that criteria.
Carrie Tipper, Representative Carrie Tipper, one of the sponsors of the bill. Amanda Gall, that last person, works as an assistant district attorney in the 1st Judicial District in Jefferson and Gilpin County against the bill. There's something called the Sex Offender Management Board. It's a group of 25 people that oversee the standards and guidelines to assess the management and the treatment of sex offenders. There have been a few audits recently of that board, not very positive. This bill also changes who could sit on that board, and it takes some of the power away by letting the Department of Corrections make some treatment decisions on sex offenders, not necessarily that Sex Offender Management Board, Kyle.
So, Marshall, we are at a late point in the legislative session where a number of things can happen with bills. Either the Democrats in charge can push them through, pass them, a bill could fail, or it could just stall out and not go anywhere, and just be sitting there at the end of the session.
What I know about this bill, if you look online right now, it's an 8-page bill, but I have what's called, and we've referenced this in the last week or two, a strike below, which basically rewrites the entire bill the second it gets in committee. That's 30 pages. Behind the scenes, the people that are involved in this now know the detail of those 30 pages. The public will find out tomorrow when it's in committee. As far as I know, it's that 30-page version that we're going to probably move forward with, but it could change as soon as it's introduced.
Marshall, always modest, says the public will find out tomorrow, except for all the members of the public who just found out. From Politics guy Marshall Zellinger. Thank you, Marshall. Quick check on our progress with vaccinations in this state. 46.5% of Coloradans have now completed the process. That's almost 2.5 million people. And there are another 457,000 waiting on their second doses. Once you get them in, that'll push us past the 50% mark. So after a steady decline in hospitalizations through mid-May, it appears that they have plateaued again. That has just been the trickiest part of getting the pandemic behind us in Colorado. There are 511 people currently in the hospital with COVID. It's down 5 patients from the day before. This time last week, 530 patients being treated for COVID in our state. The test positivity rate statewide is now at its lowest point since the beginning of March. Tremendous news. 3.9% yesterday brings our 7-day average down to 3.4%. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, the saying goes, and the businesses that are excluding Coloradans from job postings got a whole lot of sunshine they probably didn't want. A viral Reddit post on Thursday, Marshall investigating the claims on Friday that Coloradans were being told not to apply for remote work jobs because of the new state law requiring employers to post salary requirements. Well, now there is a website that is tracking which companies are doing this. ColoradoExcluded.com was created by a guy named Aaron Bastillo. It's a crowdsourced website where people alert him to job postings that say that Coloradans need not apply. Aaron then looks at the postings for those companies, and if it checks out, he manually adds them to ColoradoExcluded.com. A review of job postings by 9 Wants to Know found 10 companies that said that they would hire anyone in the U.S. except for those currently in Colorado. Aaron's website so far lists 30 companies: Nike, Airbnb, Sherwin-Williams.
It's unfortunate that Colorado is going to be excluded. I think there's a lot of really great talent here, both in the tech sector and just more generally. I think that employees should have a right to know what they might be getting paid. And I think there's a reason why the transparency is valued.
So what's his play here? Aaron says that if other states start enforcing similar wage transparency laws, then he would consider taking his website down or possibly expanding it to include people in those other states if it turns out that they are excluded in the same way that Coloradans now are. Driving cross-country with your weight in weed in the car. That's not how you Nebraska. That is definitely not how you Nebraska. They do not like that there. The Nebraska State Patrol just said that they used a drug dog during a recent traffic stop on I-80. Drug dog, probably unnecessary when your eyes and nose would have probably cracked this case, because they say the driver, Robert Jones out of Denver, had 181 pounds of marijuana riding in the back seat. Mr. Jones, what's in the duffels? See, now in Colorado, you're just on your way to your friend's house for a barbecue. But in Nebraska, that's a criminal offense, one that their state patrol was quite happy to brag about today. A quick word of thanks from me to you. You have raised more than $100,000 as a Next community this month to fight hunger in Colorado. $34,000 last week alone for the Food Bank of the Rockies program that sends kids home from school or from community activities each Friday with enough food for their whole family for the whole weekend. Your generosity over this past month on this persistent issue has ensured the success of the 9 Cares Colorado Shares annual food drive, a food drive in a year that we can't get together in person for the normal food drive. $100,000 raised by Next viewers is going to go a long way for Food Bank of the Rockies, and you have raised $3.8 million for Colorado's small to mid-sized nonprofits through Word of Thanks, and there is 1 week remaining until the first anniversary of your micro-giving campaigns. I'll be back on Wednesday night with an idea of how together we can honor those who have served and sacrificed in our state. Wildfires leave behind scars, many of them visible, some of them not. Healing people after Colorado's disasters. And speaking of wildfires, we know May's rain and snow helped out the drought east of the divide. What role will it play in the wildfire summer to come? And after almost 300 episodes of this program in the home studio, this is the last week. And it's time I confess something to you. Next. Suncor Energy is going to put out double of something, and it is not pollution for once. Company says it is going to spend twice as much as required to cut down on repeated air quality violations at its plant north of Denver. The state has approved the company's plan for upgrades to its refinery in Commerce City. It includes an automatic shutdown system in what's called the cracking unit of Plant 2. It's a large piece of refinery equipment they use to make gasoline. When the pressure inside of it's out of balance, that's when you see the plumes of white smoke and dust coming out of the plant. Suncor is also upgrading the automatic shutdown system in its Plant 1 cracking unit. Suncor has really been feeling the heat lately from neighbors and from environmental groups. A settlement last year required the company spend $5 million on environmental upgrades. Suncor is now saying it'll spend $12 million. When we talk about recovery from natural disasters, fire, floods. We're so often focusing on the physical, the land, the homes, rebuilding, regrowing forest. What does not get as much attention is the mental toll on us from these disasters, the trauma from surviving or just being close to natural disaster after natural disaster. That trauma can be sneaky and damaging. Here's Steve Steger.
The scars are in plain sight in Grand County. The East Troublesome Fire forever changed this community.
I was not in the evacuation area. I had family who were.
Nearly everyone here has a story like McKenna Line.
And it was an adrenaline-filled time.
She was on the front lines back then, not fighting the fire, but fighting the feelings associated with it. She runs the county's largest mental health provider, focusing on a wildfire scar that's hidden and often forgotten about.
I think we immediately think about our immediate needs and our safety needs and our physical needs. And do we have a somewhere to stay? Are we safe? Do we have things to eat, clothes, all of those immediate needs? And our emotional needs often are on the back burner.
As the months pass, she says those needs often manifest in different ways.
Physical, behavioral, cognitive, emotional. So people might find that their anxiety has increased or they're triggered by things that they're experiencing in everyday life a little differently than before.
You didn't have to experience loss to feel it.
Whether you were an evacuee, whether you lost a home, whether you were a first responder, or somebody who helped work at the Disaster Assistance Center.
Line and her team are ready to help. The nonprofit Grand Foundation will pay for 5 free therapy sessions for anyone impacted by the fire. Help that costs nothing. But in all these months since the fire, Line says fewer than 10 people have taken them up on it.
People often think that if they reach out for mental health care that they're weak or they're going to need to receive care for the rest of their lives, and that's really not true. There is that stigma around mental health in rural communities, kind of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
It may be pride or simply time. It can take months to process a truly traumatic event.
We are preparing for an influx in need in services.
As spring moves into Grand County, signs of revival are all around. The snow is melting. People are starting to rebuild. There's one sign Line hopes people take a moment to read.
I hope that people understand that, again, they are not alone and that hope is always there for anyone who's struggling and going through a tough time.
For Next, I'm Steve Steger.
Again, anyone impacted by the East Troublesome Fire can get 5 free sessions with Mind Springs Health, and there's a link to scheduling information in Steve's article on 9news.com. April showers bring May flowers, but how about April's impact on the wildfire season to come? We'll talk drought and fire forecast when we return. And as we start our final week of the show in the home studio, I need to come clean about something. It's about the wood pile. Next.
Monday, sunshine and 70s for a change and quiet weather this week for the last full week of May. We're tracking a couple of isolated strong storms on the far eastern plains. Tornado watch out until 9 o'clock between Burlington and Lamar. Hail reports, rotating thunderstorms that could go late into the night for Nebraska and Kansas. Those storms move out. Denver is fair and quiet tonight and a beautiful day tomorrow with lots of sunshine. We do have a low of 46 tonight and we'll rebound back into the mid 70s tomorrow. We have isolated thunderstorms till we hit the weekend, a better chance of rain from storms on Sunday, and then for the holiday on Monday.
Tonight's next question is about our recent rain and how beneficial what seemed like a lot of May moisture is really going to be for both our drought conditions and the upcoming months of wildfire danger. Meteorologist Corey Reppenhagen would know.
On average, Denver gets rain or snow 86 days a year, so that's 279 dry days. And most of those dry days happen under clear skies.
You know, we get a lot of sunshine, and we have a lot of cloud-free days.
Assistant State Climatologist Becky Bollinger says that our climate type is called semi-arid, which means the amount of precipitation we get is always lower than the amount of moisture we lose to evaporation. She says a normal Colorado drying recipe would be rain in the afternoon one day, followed by 3 days of sunshine. We've strayed from that pattern over the past couple of months, though, with long 3 or 4 day stretches of rain and snow, accompanied by cooler than normal temperatures and lots of cloud cover.
Yeah, I mean, they're really beneficial, and it's not normal for our area. You know, these are things that you would expect to see in Seattle.
Bollinger says cloudy days will keep the drought away, but that famous Colorado sunshine will likely not stay hidden forever.
Even in Northeast Colorado, it would really only take us about 3 hot and dry weeks, and we would start to see a little bit of vegetative stress. You know, maybe not drought, but I think we would start to see the stress in the vegetation.
Last summer, we got a lesson in just how fast Mother Nature can flip the switch. Colorado went from good snowpack and a very wet March to major wildfire outbreaks in just 3 months. A relatively new phenomenon that scientists call a flash drought.
And I think that is something that we would be at higher risk for in the future, increased frequency of those flash drought type events.
Meteorologist Corey Reppenhagen for Next.
Bollinger says the reality is just that part of Colorado is almost always going to be in some level of drought, the way they define it. Since the drought monitor was developed in 2000, Colorado was only completely drought-free one time. It was the summer of 2019. It lasted 2 months. All right, what questions do you have that you would like to have answered here? Because somebody out there is wondering about the same stuff as you, I promise you. So record a video or a voice memo of yourself asking the question, then send it to us. Next at 9news.com is the email. I read every one. Or send it to us on Twitter with the hashtag HeyNext. This is the last week for Next in our home studio here. You kept it around by popular demand for months after I started anchoring 9 News at 9 and 10 p.m. back in the studio. As we say goodbye to this place where we spent the pandemic together, I have a confession to make. So at least in the beginning, some of you were convinced that the logs in the little wood circle back there behind me were moving. They were. 1 log a day. I'm easily amused. It helped mark the passage of time, so I would move 1 following every night's show. Also, I took pictures and we set it to sad music like in those commercials that raise money for animals.
Not the last to love you. Felt like I'm weightless.
The most Colorado thing we saw today is the idea that every good boy and girl who wants a stick should get a stick. Jennifer and her husband were walking their dog Henry when they came upon a pile of wood in Frisco. It is a stick library, so the sign says. You know, similar to like those little free libraries that you see on the boxes around neighborhoods. If any passing dog needs a stick, they can take one. Presumably, if a dog is done with a stick, they can leave one. And look at that good boy. That's Henry. Lori writes in tonight about Marshall Zellinger's story about changing the requirements for sex offenders to get out of prison. She said, just curious if any of these bills have taken into account the thoughts of any sexual assault victims, or are their voices being silenced again? We want to hear from you. Next at 9news.com. I'll read it, Marshall will read it, we'll share some thoughts next time.